What's going on, everybody? Thanks for watching again. Today we're driving a car that was pretty excited about being able to drive and review and spend some time with. When it comes to like my personal classic cars, I'm a big BMW fan, but there are a few Mercedes models that I've definitely appreciate, and that's one of those is like a 190e 2.3 16 valve, obviously great touring car, racing heritage and whatnot, and the other car is one of these that I'm in right now, which is a 1987 Mercedes-Benz 560 SEC. And this is basically one of the, when it comes to 80s cars, this is definitely one of the ultimate, kind of super coupes, I guess you could call it, from the 80s. This is a 560, so it was the most powerful version that they offered. This one has been modified even further, so it's got a nice bump up in horsepower and torque, and it's also been modified for better handling. So let's take it for a drive and see what it's like. So this is a C126 coupe, which is what Mercedes referred to it as. It was introduced in 1979 and came out as a 1980 model, basically. So it's an S-Class. The W126 is the sedan version of the S-Class that came out a little bit before this car came out. And of course the S-Class from this era, late 70s into the 80s, definitely was one of Mercedes' better, S-Classes. I mean, this is definitely a high point for them. As far as the cars that they made during this era, I think that these cars, the styling, the build quality, the performance, they were all pretty impressive. I mean, definitely they're very nice cars, and that's starting to show, of course, in the values of them, because they're going up in value, especially the 560 SECs, because they're relatively rare. When it came out, it had a 5-liter V8, and then it was a 3.8-liter V8. I want to say back when the car first came out in 1980. Then in 1986 there was a facelift basically that happened, and they changed the design of the bumpers. That's actually a pretty good design change. It's a lot clearer than the previous versions, but at the same time they also introduced the 5.6-liter V8, and it had actually pretty good performance. I mean, it had 238 horsepower, something like that, and about 290, maybe just under 290 foot-pounds of torque. And that, back in 87, which is what year this one is, that's a pretty impressive figure when you think about it, if you compare it to cars from the same era. A stock 560 SEC is actually kind of a sporty car. I mean, it's 0 to 60. When it was new, it was 0 to 60 in just a hair under 7 seconds, which, again, I know that wouldn't be considered very quick by current standards, but you have to put it in the context of the era that it came from. So I want to give a shout out to Caribou Engineering. They're the guys who built the car, and they also lent it to me. You probably recognize their name from a couple of the other videos that I've done. And I don't work for Caribou, but I work, I've done articles about their cars over the years, and so they're just really good about letting me have access to these cars, and this channel's kind of new, and so I'm just getting cars as they're available, and they've been really good about letting me, kind of test the cars that they work on. And this particular car was basically, or is their test vehicle for this line of performance parts they're developing for Mercedes. And so Caribou took the engine out and completely rebuilt it into a high-performance version. So they used the original crank and the original connecting rods, but they put in high compression pistons. So instead of 9 to 1, it's 10.5 to 1 compression ratio. They also enlarged the displacement to 5.8 liters, so it's basically 5.6 to 5.8. They also installed camshafts that are a custom grind that they came up with, basically, that it's a grind that increases torque. It was more torque oriented than horsepower oriented, and keeping it drivable. Like at idle, when you start it up, it has a slightly lopey idle, but nothing, you barely notice it, and so it's really drivable. But definitely this car has a ton of torque. It's definitely it's a quick car. The exhaust system is made up of stainless steel headers, stainless steel downpipes, and then a full stainless steel 60mm exhaust system. So sounds really good. The air intake system has been modified, has a dual snorkel setup that has a larger airbox. The distributor has been modified, and it works with an MSD ignition box, basically. So the fuel injection has also been upgraded. It uses the original CISK Jetronic fuel injection, so it's got fully programmable fuel injection, basically, so they're able to like program in throughout the whole rev range, and this thing just makes really smooth, progressive power. There's some head work done to it, a little bit of porting and polishing. So basically, the end result of all this work is that the engine now puts out just under 390 foot-pounds of torque at around 4,000 RPM, and it has just over 350 horsepower. It's a significant improvement on a stock SEC, definitely. So the suspension has also been modified. It has H&R lowering springs, new Bilstein heavy-duty Bilstein HD shocks. It also has a custom rear sway bar from Australian company coupes. coupes specializes in parts for, the S-Class, as well as the like the C126, like this one, as well as the R107 SL. And so basically, it's a rear anti-roll bar that's larger than the stock one, but it's also called a anti-squat bar, and this car does feel very stable, especially under acceleration. It puts all the power down. The rear suspension also has custom bushings that allow the camber and everything to be dialed in. So this actually has on the rear, it has a pretty aggressive camber setup, which actually makes the car feel really stable and a little more nimble as well. So the self-leveling aspect of it has been removed as well. So it's basically just a really conventional suspension, which feels really good. So the transmission on this car has also been modified, and what it does is normally when you get into one of these cars and you put it into drive, it starts out in second gear, but this transmission has been reconfigured so that it actually starts out in first gear, which gives you better performance off the line. And it's also been reconfigured to shift a little bit quicker on upshifts and downshifts, I believe, as well. So it's got 17-inch AMG wheels. The handling I was expecting to be kind of like not that impressed by it, just because of the weight of the car and the fact that it was a little bit older of a car, but it's very impressive, I have to say. This thing is an absolute blast to drive for what it is. It's very quick. I mean, almost 400 foot-pounds of torque. The mid-range and once it comes up on about 4,000 RPM, brakes are not bad. They're stock brakes. I mean, it's heavy, but with the power that it's got, man, it's really fun. I mean, this is a really solid feeling car. It's not overly luxurious. It's not like a Lexus kind of like wafting along. I mean, it's got a really mechanical, substantial feel to it. Body control is really good. It feels very rigid, and it's surprisingly nimble. I mean, it's not a light car. It weighs 3,500 to 3,700 pounds. I couldn't find the exact figures. There was a range of weights. This one's probably on the higher end because it's a later one. It's probably around 3,800 pounds. So it's not light, but it hides its heft and its weight really well. Surprisingly nimble. The engine, absolutely terrific, really good character. Revs really effortlessly and makes, like I said, a lot of power. I mean, 350 horsepower and 390-ish foot-pounds of torque is that's a good amount of power. And the transmission, like you can tell, it downshifts and upshifts pretty quickly. Very stable and planted, and I think a lot of that has to do with the alignment settings, as well as the rear sway bar. I have a feeling that a stock SEC would probably understeer more than this thing. The steering is a little bit heavier than you would think as well. I mean, it's power steering, but it actually has a nice little heft to it. The steering has a little bit of on-center vagueness, but once you get it cranked into a turn, it's not bad at all. Yeah, this thing is surprisingly fun to drive. Overall, very impressive car. Styling is absolutely terrific looking. It's a pillarless coupe. It was designed by an Italian designer named Bruno Sacco, who worked for Mercedes, and he designed the C111 concept car. He designed 190E as well, which is the other Mercedes that I appreciate from the era, and then he designed this. And this car is like trying to describe it in a couple of words. It's elegant, but it's muscular and kind of some pretty aggressive looking and really simple. In a way, it's like sort of like the R107 SL, which was straight lines, really simple. This kind of hews to that sort of tradition of just having really clean straight lines, really great proportions. I mean, this is definitely a big car. It's very long and it's relatively wide, but it looks really great. I mean, it's a really, really nicely styled car. So there's got a few interesting touches on the design. The door handle surrounds, the reason that they are that large and the shape that they are is that they actually prevent dirt and grime from getting on the door handle itself. So this is a very Mercedes thing, you know, you don't want to get your hands dirty when you open the door. It has the finned taillights as well, basically. So those are finned also to prevent dirt and grime from building up, so you get better visibility from the brake lights, so it's kind of a safety thing as well. So the interior on this car is really nice. It's a pretty big car, and so that is obviously reflected in the interior, and the windshield is it's wide and kind of low, and the interior is very spacious. Beautiful design. I love the interior design, the door panels especially. I mean, when this thing came out in 1980, I imagine people probably thought it was pretty futuristic looking. It's got really cool looking door panel design with these sweeping lines. Mercedes pioneered the use of these power buttons for the seats, and they actually look like the seats. There's also power headrests, which is interesting right here. So if you want to move the headrest, you move it up or down with this little button here, and they actually work still, which is amazing. Now, the other strange thing is that the rearview mirror on the driver's side is not power, it's manual, and it's got this really cool little mechanism that you use to adjust it, and it's actually a pretty precise adjuster. But it's just interesting that it has power headrests, but it doesn't have a power rearview mirror. It has a town and country horn, so that's, I think, the town setting. That's the country. It's a little bit louder. It has these seatbelt presenters, which when you get in and you turn the ignition on, this arm comes out and basically presents you with the seatbelt, and so you can just grab it right here. And the reason for that, it's not just because it's like a luxurious kind of thing. Because of the design of the car, it's a pillarless coupe, right? So there's technically no B-pillar, and so that meant that they had to move the seatbelt mechanism further back away from the driver, and so their solution for that was to basically have these arms, these electric arms that come out and give you the seatbelt, and then they move back. You know, the gauges are big, bold, easy to read. It's got a very large steering wheel. It feels appropriate for the car, but it's big for sure. Driving position, it's very commanding. It's comfortable compared to the last Mercedes I drove, which was that R107 560 SL. Definitely, this is a huge leap. I mean, that car, you can tell when you drive it, it's a 60s era car, and the C126 definitely feels more like a car that was designed in the 70s. It's much more modern feeling, and it's very comfortable, very, very comfortable. Like I said, spacious, but it's luxurious, but it's also surprisingly mechanical and like kind of heavy feeling. So, all right, you guys, thanks for watching again. I appreciate it, and hit that subscribe button if you like what you're watching. Any comments are always welcome as well about the videos or whatever. So I will catch you on the next video.